Да, позвольте предоставить немножко времени остальным коллегам присоединиться. А пока мы ждем, давайте пройдемся, как обычно, по техническим моментам. Да, в первую очередь хотелось бы напомнить, что у нас сегодня сессия будет проходить на английском языке, с синхронным переводом на русский. Поэтому, когда наш эксперт начнет основную содержательную часть, большая просьба переключить канал, да, перевода с английского на русский. Это вы можете сделать, найдя в нижней части своего экрана кнопку перевода и выбрать соответствующий канал. Второй момент – это то, что наша сессия, как и обычно, сегодня будет записываться для того, чтобы предоставить возможность всем остальным коллегам, которые не смогли принять участие на онлайн-сессии, познакомиться с материалом. Поэтому, если вы не хотите, чтобы ваше видео попадало на запись, пожалуйста, выключите свою камеру. Это абсолютно нормально. Также просим вас во время основной содержательной части отключить свои микрофоны для того, чтобы не мешать всем остальным коллегам. А также в последний момент, да, просьба сохранить все ваши вопросы до финальной части сессии. Когда будет выделено определенное время, у вас будет возможность задать вопрос, поделиться комментариями. Заранее благодарим вас за содействие. Можно будет, пожалуйста, следующий слайд. Давайте мы пока представим, да, вам, точнее, напомним вам основной контекст, в рамках которого мы сегодня с вами собираемся. Напоминаем то, что мы сегодня приветствуем вас на международном вебинаре Дарья Scaffold. Это у нас 4-я сессия, и данный вебинар у нас проходит в рамках инициативы Дарья Scaffold, которая, в свою очередь, является частью большей инициативы под названием «Дарья. Диалог и действия для находчивой молодежи в Центральной Азии». И данную инициативу у нас реализует Европейский фонд образования в сотрудничестве с национальными органами, национальными ведомствами Центральной Азии, которые отвечают за развитие образования и профессиональных навыков. В свою очередь, команда Дарья Scaffold развивает, да, компетентностные подходы, помогает вам, коллеги, в более эффективном планировании ваших занятий посредством инструмента Scaffold. И мы очень рады, то, что уже несколько лет подряд Scaffold применяется очень большим количеством педагогов в Центральной Азии, и это количество растет месяц за месяцем. Можно будет, пожалуйста, следующий слайд. Да, как я говорила ранее, сегодня у нас уже с вами 4-я сессия из серии международных вебинаров Дарья Scaffold. Всего данных сессий у нас будет 7, и все анонсы, да, будущих мероприятий у нас будут опубликованы в телеграм-канале, в группе Дарья Scaffold, да, где у нас больше сейчас 1000 педагогов со всей Центральной Азии, а также будет публиковаться на мини-сайте нашей страницы, нашей инициативы Дарья Scaffold в Notion. Сейчас ссылки на данные ресурсы будут размещены в чате для вашего удобства, поэтому, пожалуйста, воспользуйтесь данными ресурсами. Говоря о формате сессии, формат у нас сегодня, да, как я говорила, основной язык русский, английский. И сессия продлится у нас 90 минут. А сейчас позвольте без отлагательств перейти, да, к основной части нашей презентации и передать слово нашему эксперту Флавию Блешенину. Flavio, please, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Victoria. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. And my name is Flavio Brescianini. I'm a research fellow and adjunct professor at the University of Bologna Department of Education Studies, where I teach educational research and designing and evaluating educational projects. In my work, I focus on competence development and assessment in vocational education and training and in higher education. And I study how competencies, especially transversal competencies and citizenship competencies, can be assessed through formative assessment practices and how this shapes teaching and learning processes. I also collaborate with national and European institutions on initiatives related to vocational teacher development and the promotion of citizenship education. And today I hope to share a few practical tools you can take into your own teaching. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So today I will cover the topics you can see on this slide. First, I will briefly recall some basic concepts about assessment, and I will focus in particular on formative assessment. Then I will discuss how we can assess competencies. And here the key idea is authentic assessment, as we will see. After that, I will introduce a practical tool for competence assessment, and that it can integrate the assessment methods that you can find in the scaffold cards. And finally, I will show an example of how to plan competence-based assessment activities using scaffold. And I will mainly give you a short lecture, but I will also try to provide concrete examples. And at the end, I will give you a handout exercise that you may also find useful for your own teaching, hopefully. Next slide, please. So let's start with a very basic definition of assessment. We can consider assessment as a planned process of collecting evidence or information in order to make a judgment about learners' progress towards achieving the intended learning outcomes. So assessment means that we gather information about learners' outcomes. Then we do something more, we interpret it. We make a judgment. It is not only measuring, it is not only giving a grade. It is also describing the value or the quality of what learners can do. And here with intending learning outcomes, I mean something that can define the statements of what learners are expected to know, understand, and be able to do by the end of the learning activity or by the end of a course. Next, please. So when we work on assessment, we always need to consider 4 questions. Why do we assess? When do we assess? And this depends on why. What do we assess? And how do we assess? And this depends on what. And these are 4 questions that help us stay aware of what we are doing, whatever professional or personal activity we are dealing with. But with assessment, there are different possible answers, and the way we answer these questions shapes the kind of assessment we are doing. Next. Let's start with the first question. Why do we assess? There are different answers, but I will mention 3 main ones. First, to understand learner's starting point. When we do this, we talk about diagnostic assessment. Sometimes it is also called initial assessment. Second answer is to check whether learners have achieved the intended learning outcomes. And this is close to the definition of assessment I just gave to you. In fact, this is the most traditional, I would say, form of assessment. And we call this summative assessment. And sometimes it is also called a certification when it leads to an official document that attests the learner's achievement. And third, we can answer saying that we assess to identify the gap between current learning and the intended learning outcomes with the aim of improving learning. And this is called formative assessment. And we will focus on this in a few minutes. Next slide, please. The second question is, when do we assess? As you can see, this is closely related to the previous question, and very quickly, we do diagnostic assessment before teaching and learning. We do a summative assessment at the end of teaching and learning, and we do formative assessment during the process of teaching and learning. Next slide, please. And here is a simple example. I do diagnostic assessment, for example, at the beginning of a new school year. Maybe I want to understand the starting point of my students. They may be new students, or they may be the usual students, but after a long break, and maybe I need to check what they still remember for the previous school year. I do summative assessment at the end of the school year or at the end of semester. For example, I do a final exam, and this helps me determine the final grade. And finally, I do formative assessment during the school year. It is an ongoing process. It helps me monitor teaching and learning, and it should help me teaching better, and it helps my student to learn better. Now, let's focus on formative assessment. Next slide, please. And because as we will see, it is a very important perspective for the assessment of competencies. A well-known definition of formative assessment is provided by Paul Black and Dylan William. They are two key scholars in this field, and they showed through empirical research how effective formative assessment can be in improving learning. According to them, formative assessment includes all those activities undertaken by teachers and or by their students, which provide information to be used as feedback to modify the teaching and learning activities in which they are engaged. So, what does modifying teaching and learning means here? It means adjusting teaching based on evidence that emerges during the assessment activities. The goal here is to improve learning, and in this perspective, the point is not only whether learners demonstrate achievement in a task, but the point is also to ask why did they achieve it, or why did they not achieve it? And if they didn't not achieve it, we should ask ourselves two questions as teachers. What should I change in my teaching to help them improve? And what can they change as learners in order to learn more? Next slide, please. So, you may ask, why should we embrace this perspective, the formative assessment perspective? Let me use a phrase from Grant Wiggins, another educator, scholar, well known for his work on assessment and curriculum design. Since the student is the primary client of all teaching and assessment, assessment should be designed to improve performance, not just to monitor it. So, for us as teachers, trainers, and educators, assessment should not be only a final check. Assessment should support our main aim, our main objective. Our main objective is to help learners improve. Next slide, please. But how can we do this? Formative assessment includes a set of key strategies. Typically, there are 5 of them, but they could be a bit overwhelming, I think, if taken into account altogether. So I will highlight 3 main ideas. First, we need to clarify what we want students to be able to do. We should share this with them. For example, we may say to a student, I want you to be able to read and understand a novel from the 18th century. And we should also share the criteria that show this achievement with them. For example, you will need to read some parts of the novel aloud, or you will need to write a short essay explaining the main topics of an extract of a novel from the 18th century. Second, we need to make learning visible. This means engaging students in activities that allow us to collect evidence of learning. These activities can be tests, they can be oral examinations, they can also be group work. In general, there are activities where we can observe signs of learning. Third, we need to provide feedback. And this is probably the most important point. Based on evidence, we need...
Извините, Виктория, на русском нет перевода.
Is there a question,
Да.
maybe?
Да,
No,
отключиться на
please
русском.
continue. Yeah.
Перевод, да.
Okay.
Ну, что-то там технически случится, да? Или там? Определись? Давайте.
Okay, sorry. So third, I was saying we need to provide feedback, and this is, I think, the most important point in formative assessment, and which means that based on the evidence, we tell students what is working and what is not working, and we have to explain why. For example, you did well here because you did this and that, or you need to work more on this point because this is where you are and still not strong enough. And we can also support self-feedback, and if students know the criteria, they can judge their own work by themselves better. Next slide, please. If there are some questions, please ask me in the chat. So I will be glad to answer to them.
Apologies, there was some technical issue with interpretation. Now it seems like all set.
Okay. Is it necessary to repeat something, or we can go on?
Уважаемые коллеги, подскажите, пожалуйста, сколько минут не было слышно перевода, мы можем обратно вернуться и пройти по этому слайду еще раз.
Okay, so we can go back to the slide on strategies, formative assessment strategies, right?
Коллеги, если вы не против, мы можем вернуться на один слайд назад. На 1-2 слайда назад.
Да, давайте вернемся.
Flavio, if we could go
Okay,
back
so
like 2 slides back.
okay, thank you. Perfect. Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, Lysia. I was saying that the main three ideas of formative assessment are to clarify and share what you want students to be able to do, and also the criteria that show that they are able to do what I want them to be able to. And the second, the second idea is that we need to make learning visible, and this means doing activities with students that allow us to collect evidence of their learning. And the third, which is the most important, we need to provide feedback to the students. And we have to tell the student what is working and what is not working. And this helps them to improve. So we can go to the next slide now. Now that we are clarified these basic ideas, we can move to the assessment of competencies. And when we address competence-based assessment, there are something that we have to take into account. First of all, there are different types of learning we can assess. And the most, I would say, traditional one is knowledge, and is about knowing facts, knowing rules, knowing procedures. And I prepared 3 examples. One is based on a language-related subject. One is more, let's say, mathematical and scientific type of subject. And one is from a vocational discipline. And when assessing knowledge, we can ask to our students, do you know the structure of a simple sentence, simple phrase in English? Or do you know the definition of proportion? Finally, do you know the steps to do this specific haircut? And we can also assess abilities or skills. And this means being able to do something. And following the example, we can ask to show us, are you able to write a simple sentence in English? Are you able to calculate a proportion? And are you actually able to do this specific haircut? Next slide, please. When we assess competencies, we assess something more complex. Because a competence includes knowledge and skills, but also personal and social abilities. In fact, in European Union documents, in the European language, a competence is described as the proven ability to use knowledge and skills, but also personal and social abilities in work or study situations and for professional and personal development. And this definition is actually a good synthesis on what we can find in scientific literature about competencies. So, building on the previous examples, we assess a competence when we ask, can you write several simple sentences in English to answer a specific question? Can you decide which product is the best buy at the supermarket by calculating proportion? And can you do the haircut on a real person, not on a dummy head, for example, on a person with low density hair? But how can we do this? So, next slide, please. How can we assess a competence? In education, we often talk about the competence turn, referring to the way the focus is shifting in education and training all over the world from contents to learning outcomes. It shifts from transmitting knowledge to supporting the development of competencies. This shift requires a change in assessment as well, because assessing a competence is not only about what students know, but it is about what they can do in a real life context, possibly, with what they know. This means this is why we often say that assessment needs to be authentic. And this leads us to the concept of authentic assessment. And we can go to the next slide, please. Once again, Grant Wiggins helps us in framing the concept. He defines authentic assessment as a true check of performance. And authentic assessment, according to Wiggins, helps us to determine whether students can use intelligently what they have learned in situations that are close to adult ones, real life ones. And it also helps us see whether they can introduce innovation in new situations. We can go to the next slide if there are no questions. Thank you. So, what are the characteristics of authentic assessment and what makes it suitable for competence assessment?
Flavio, if we could pause for a second.
Okay, sure.
Уважаемые коллеги, слышно ли перевод?
Опять потерялся.
Да, снова там какие-то помехи были, потом все.
Так, секундочку, давайте мы посмотрим. Приносим извинения. Так, давайте попробуем еще раз русский перевод. Так, Олеся, здравствуйте еще раз. Давайте проверим русский канал. Все, прекрасно, все слышим.
Да, слышно сейчас.
Yes, apologies, Flavio. We could continue again, like issues with interpretation. Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Well, we're good to go.
Okay. So we need to get back on some
No,
constants before.
we can continue. Yeah,
Okay, we can continue. Very good, thank you. So I was presenting this slide. So what are the characteristics of authentic assessment? And first, it is performance-based. Learners are asked to do something, not only to recall information, because we are interested in what learners do with knowledge and not only in the knowledge itself. Second, it has to be realistic and meaningful, meaning that assessment tasks should resemble real-world or professional situations. Third, authentic assessment requires judgment and innovation. And if possible, tasks should not have only one single correct answer. Learners must make choices, and they should be able to explain their choices. Fourth, it requires integration of knowledge and skills. And tasks should not focus only on knowledge or only on skills, but they find a way to make the underlying knowledge visible. If, for example, I'm assessing an ability. For example, after a haircut that was made by a student, or after solving a math problem, we can ask to the student, why did you do it in that way? And finally, authentic assessment supports feedback and improvement, and it gives the opportunity for formative feedback during the process. And this is also why I stressed about formative assessment in the beginning. So we can go to the next slide, please. Very good. And how can we use authentic assessment to assess competencies in practice? Well, Scaffold, I think, offers this opportunity because it offers a range of assessment methods, and they can help us in collecting different kind of evidence. Of course, Scaffold is not a prescriptive tool. It is a tool to support and inspire your teaching and assessment activities. So you can also use other methods that you already know. You can also integrate or adapt the Scaffold assessment methods cards. At the same time, we should remember that competencies are complex constructs. They combine knowledge and abilities, so cognitive, but also social and personal aspects. So it is strongly recommended to combine multiple assessment methods. This helps us capture different aspects of competencies from different perspectives. For example, we can use observation to assess a product, and we can use questions to make metacognitive processes visible. In other words, we can ask learners why they did something in a certain way, because observation alone cannot tell us everything about the processes underlying a product. Next slide, please. So the assessment methods provided by Scaffold, they are very practical, I think. But there is an even more practical level which is the level of assessment tools. We can distinguish methods and tools like this. An assessment method is how we elicit evidence through observation, test, interviews, and so on. And an assessment tool is what we use to judge the quality of the evidence collected. Next slide, please. So today I want to introduce one tool. I want to introduce you one tool, which is the scoring rubric. And many of you probably already know rubrics, maybe with a different name, but I am sure that once we look at the example, it will become clear. A rubric can be defined according to McTighe and Ferrara as a scoring tool used to evaluate the quality of constructed response products and performances. Rubrics are very versatile. They work well with many assessment methods and activities, and they can be used by teachers to assess students' work. This is the most common use when the teacher use them, but they can also be used by students. Students can use rubrics to assess each other's work, and this is called peer assessment, but they can also use rubrics to assess their own work, and this is self-assessment. Next slide. Thank you. Rubrics are widely used in competence assessment because they fit the purposes of authentic assessment, and they are also relatively easy to build. They are made like this. They include three components. First, predetermined scoring scale, or in other words, learning levels. Second, a set of criteria that describe the quality of performance at each level. And third, examples of performance or evidence. And these are also called anchors, and they illustrate what each level looks like for each criterion. Graphically, a rubric is essentially a grid, or more precisely, a double entry table. And you can see in the first row we have the learning levels. In this example, we used 4 in the process: base, intermediate, and advanced. And in the first column, you see the criteria. So we have criterion 1, criterion 2, and so on. And the number of criteria depends on the task and what are our intended learning outcomes. And in a moment, I will show you a concrete example of a rubric. But for now, let's move on the next slide. And let's reflect about how scaffold help us in planning and doing competence-based assessment. So we bring together, authentic assessment and scaffold methods. So scaffold is intrinsically competence-based because it supports the design of competence-based teaching activities. And this also implies that competence-based assessment is needed. And as you have seen, if we want learners to develop a competence, we need assessment activities where that competence can be observed in action. And that is why the assessment methods included in the scaffold cards are really well aligned with the competence approach. In this way, somehow scaffold helps align planning, learning objectives, learning activities, and assessment activities and evidence. It puts everything on the same logical continuum. But let me explain this more clearly with the next slide. We can explicitly see this alignment function in the planning cards. Assessment is not something that you, I would say, that happens only at the end. It is something that guides the whole planning and teaching process. For example, the define competence level card is basically diagnostic assessment. It also requires us to think from the beginning, what do I want to observe as evidence of the learning outcome? And this becomes even more explicit in card number 4. The card asks us to choose which product of performance we want learners to produce. And only after that, we can choose the assessment method. All of this highlights that in a competence-based approach, assessment is a process. It begins with planning, and it guides the teaching and learning process until the end. Next slide, please. So, I would like now to give you a concrete example. Imagine I am a vocational education and training teacher, and I'm training future electricians. And at a certain point, I teach how to create a specific electrical circuit. And this is my intended learning outcome. I want my students to be able to create this specific electrical circuit. But at the same time, I also want, let's say, develop the competence of working with others, which is scaffold entrecomp card E14. And this makes sense because electricians often work in teams. And now I need to choose the output or evidence I want to see, as in scaffold planning card number 4. For the disciplinary learning outcome, I mean, regarding the discipline electronics, I want to see the circuit built and working. And regarding the entrecomp competence, I want to see effective collaboration while students work in groups. Then I choose the assessment methods as in scaffold planning card number 5. And in this example, I decided to combine observation, peer feedback, and generating assessment evidence. We can go to the next slide, and we can see in practice what this means. Now the activity begins, and the students start the task. And during the activity, I observe what they do. And I use a rubric to assess their working together competence. After the activity, I integrate other assessment methods. I use peer feedback For example, I give each group of students a rubric to assess the quality of the electrical circuit of another group. And I ask them to assess the work of another group. And I also ask each group to provide feedback to other group. And then I can assess the product of students' work as a teacher, and I can use the same rubric I share with the students, and I can evaluate the quality of the work, and I will be probably more objective, being the expert of the discipline. And finally, in a formative assessment perspective, I provide feedback too. So I tell each group what worked and what did not work. So next time they can do better. Next slide, please. To make the example more complete, I also included a rubric. This is only a hypothesis of what the rubric could look like. If there is an electrician teacher here, please do not be angry with me. It's just an example to explain the logic. This is the first rubric, and this is for the assessment of the disciplinary competence, that is being able to create the electrical circuit. On the left, in the first column, you see the learning dimensions or criteria. In this example, they are functioning, cable management, and safety. And along the top row, you see the levels. They are, as in the previous example, in the process, base, intermediate, and advanced. Notice that I use in the process and not something like bad, not good, not achieved, because I am working on it. We are still in the process, and I want to support my students to develop the competence. So also the language is important. It puts me in the right mindset to improve their performance. And so for each criterion, the rubric describes how the product looks like at each level. It uses short, observable descriptions, the anchors. These descriptions help me connect what I observe with the predetermined level of proficiency. For example, the fifth criterion, which is functioning, this is about whether the circuit works and how well it works. In the process level, it says the circuit does not work, or it has frequent faults. The students cannot explain why. At base level, it says the circuit works partially or intermittently. The students identifies some issues, but with some help. At intermediate, it says the circuit works correctly. The students can explain the main connection and the main checks. And finally, at the advanced level, it says the circuit work reliability, and the students verifies performance systematically and can justify choices. So you can see a progression, and from not working and explanation to partial working and explanation with support, to correct working with explanation, and finally the more reliable working with systematic justification. And the other criterion works in the same way. For example, for cable management, in the process level, it says cables are messy, lengths or routing are incorrect, connections are loose or unsafe. And then the higher levels describe progressively better organization and professionalism, as you can see. And then we also have a safety criterion that works in the same way. So when I assess the product, I have to check which is the intersection, between the criterion and the level that suits the most with the product I'm assessing. Next slide, please. And this is an example of a rubric to assess the other competence, the competence of working with others, the key competence from the Entrecomp framework. I use it while the students are working together. I observe them. It works in the same way as the previous rubric. I just made a small graphic adjustment. Let's assume that students work in groups of 5. So for each criterion, I include 5 rows. And in this way, I can check, I can mark the level of each student in the group almost at the same time, just using one page, and I can use one rubric for the whole group. And I can assess all students while I observe the way they interact. And this shows that rubrics are pretty flexible and that you can adapt them to your teaching needs. And you can adapt them to your students and your context. So the next slide, I think it is time for the handout exercise. Exactly. I think you should already have the possibility to download the handout exercise. It is a brief template that it guides you through the steps we have just seen.
Let me upload it now.
Okay, so I'll wait the upload and then I'll guide you briefly through the template. So thank you, Victoria. I hope you will see the attachment, and meanwhile, I quickly guide you through the steps. And the first step is to choose the discipline and the topic, your discipline and topic of interest of teaching. Then you define one intended learning outcome. What do you want the students to be able to do? And if you want, you can also add a key competence taken from the scaffold cards, which makes things more interesting. And then you choose an assessment task or activity, which means, in other words, what students have to do to make learning visible. And then you specify what evidence you need to collect to assess the performance of the product. Then you can choose one or two assessment methods. You can choose from the scaffold cards, or you can use methods you already know well. And finally, you have to build a mini rubric for at least one competence. It can be the disciplinary one or the scaffold one, it doesn't matter. And you have to include at least one criterion. And I don't know how many minutes left we have actually, but there may not be enough time to complete everything because it is quite intense activity, but I suggest you to start, and then you can continue reflecting on this material after the webinar if there is no time to complete it, because I also think and hope that it can be useful for your teaching. Oh, thank you, Victoria. I see that we have 30 minutes left, and I think that would be okay to give you like 20 minutes to do the handout. While doing the exercise, if you have some question, you can type them in the chat. I would be glad to answer. So then we have 10 minutes to see just the final slide and for some other question on the overall presentation.
Уважаемые участники, хотели бы пригласить вас, да, еще раз сейчас пройти по раздаточному материалу, то есть у вас сейчас есть возможность в онлайн-режиме попробовать пройти вот, по данному процессу, который был представлен экспертом, и задать вопросы также онлайн и получить фидбэк.
Thank you, Victoria, for your suggestion. Well, let me take the handout exercise as well, so we can do. Or maybe I think that you can go back on the slides, maybe, and show the example, because there are the same fields they have to fill.
Good day, Flavia. I have a question. Do we need to do this task right now?
Yeah, if you start, you can start right now, and so if you have some question, you can ask me.
No, orally. So we can say only our how to say step by step our work. Yes, according to these steps. Because we use this methodology scaffold in our everyday lessons, so we can share.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question.
We use rubrics, yes.
Okay. Do you already use rubrics?
If you allow me, Flavio,
Yes.
уважаемая Асель, да, если вы, то есть у вас есть уже примеры, да, рубрики, вы, в принципе, можете по той же самой схеме поделиться, может быть, одним примером из одного вашего занятия, и потом мы буквально вот в конце сможем быстро пройтись по, ну, то есть вы сможете его описать там в чате или рассказать быстро. То То есть, если у вас есть конкретный пример, будет
Да, есть
замечательно.
есть пример конкретный, но вот, имеется в виду, если устно или показать, как это, у нас же доступа нету к экрану.
Flavio, this is question to you. Would you like the participants to text their brief answers in the chat, or like would you like them to maybe do a short presentation?
Yes, do we show it in presentation or only say it orally?
Oh, okay, no, I don't need to all participants to share the results, the exercise, because it will be a bit complex because you are a lot. And but it's just an exercise to reflect and try, to enter this kind of logic. But if you already have some rubrics that you would like to share with me, and maybe you can, I don't know, upload them in the chat or to discuss it more.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
You can also write to me. I mean, if you are curious to speak about rubrics and to see how and if your rubrics fits the competence-based approach and scaffold, you can also write me an email. We can discuss further these topics.
Да, уважаемые коллеги, давайте тогда мы можем тогда предложить с нашей стороны, да, как поступить. То есть мы всегда приглашаем вашу рефлексию, да, там, после вебинара вы можете, в принципе, поделиться вашей рефлексией либо в Телеграме, либо, как вот предложил эксперт, мы, в принципе, можем, вы можете ее отправить нам, и мы предоставим вам фидбэк. Если всех такой момент устраивает, то мы можем поступить таким образом. То есть сейчас мы можем попрактиковаться, да, если у вас есть конкретные примеры, их расписать, а затем вы можете поделиться ими с нами, и мы с нашей стороны предоставим фидбэк. Да, вот здесь вопрос, сейчас Сель поднимала, если вас устраивает такой вариант, мы можем так поступить.
Устно, да, то есть, или...
Как вам будет удобно, то есть, но после вебинара.
В конце вебинара, хорошо.
Flavio, so we will gather those examples that will be shared with us, and then we will try to provide feedback after the webinar.
Okay.
So we can now go over your example and then continue with the
okay. You can go back to slides more. Okay, thank you. I'm just checking for my handout in English. So, okay. So in the step 1, you can basically do what I say in the slide when I say context. You have to imagine your setting, what are you teaching, and what is your discipline. And in step 2, you have to choose the curricular and subject competence. That could be to do some specific calculation or to understand some historical topics or to being able to prepare a dish, to cook something if you're working in vocational education, or to have a certain level of interaction in English if you're an English teacher, and so on. And In step 2, there is also the scaffold competence card. You can sort a card from the deck, if you have the deck, or if you see you can see the PDF of the scaffold cards. So we get the things more interesting as we incorporate transversal competencies in our educational planning. Then in step 3, when I say assessment task or activity, we have to say what we want them to do. Are they going to write something? Are they going to say something? Are they going to give a presentation? Are they going to make a product? And this is what I expect you to do in step 3 when I ask the assessment task. And when I say evidence to collect, I want you to specify even more what are the signs that learning has occurred. For example, you can say assessment task could be giving a presentation in English. And in evidence to collect, we can say that they have to show I don't know, the right level of use of certain words, or they have to be grammatically accurate, or they have to be. It depends on the disciplinary competence. Since you are experts of your discipline, this is the thing that you have to put more of your own. In step 4, you just have to choose some assessment methods from scaffold. Of course, this choice has to be made accordingly the assessment activity you want them to do. For example, you can use observation most of the time, but maybe you cannot use automated assessment if you want to see if their level of proficiency with a language, because automated assessment typically are tests. They could include also some feedback, but typically I wouldn't use a test to check a linguistic competence. So here you choose some methods that think well fit your assessment activity. In the step 5, you start building your mini rubric, and you can create this rubric. It is enough one criterion just to practice with this logic. And you can do just one rubric for one competence. It could be the transversal competence you have choose, and it could be the disciplinary competence that you have choose. Yeah, thank you, Victoria. This is perfect. So you can say, I don't know, let me take some cards from the scaffold card. Flexibility from life competence. And if you are doing particularly challenging assessment task, maybe you can also try to assess if they are flexible, if they are able to adapt to changes, if something if something goes wrong, how they adapt to the changes, and so on. Or maybe if you are working on a disciplinary competence, you can just use some levels of competence in that specific discipline. For example, he can solve basic mathematical equations with some support dividing the thing in steps at basic level, or and the more you get advanced, the less support they have, the more they have to be autonomous in doing the task, and so on. That's the overall logic. So you can just try and experiment a little bit, put something in the rubric. It has not to be perfect. It has to be realistic, but it has not to be perfect. Just to try and stimulate a bit of reflection on what you usually do when you assess. How different is this from the usual way you have to assess? If it is the same, it's perfect. You're already doing great, and just to have opportunity to to reflect and trying something more competence oriented in assessment. So take your time to try to feel something and to ask me questions if something is not clear. So I don't know. I don't know if how it's going. I hope it is going well. I left you some time to work on it without interrupting you. And if someone want to share their work or just share some impressions or some thoughts and or ask some questions, I'd be glad to answer them and share your thoughts with your colleagues.
May I share with my lesson? For example, if I take, if I hold a lesson, yes, and already called, which called personality, and I took such competencies as, I'm sorry, I can't open it. And I took competencies as life comp, 1.4, empathy, and also I can take green comp, yes, and G5, critical thinking, then digital competencies, D1, searching information and digital content. And so in my lesson, I used neurogymnastics and brainstorming methods as watching video, and then used brainstorming questions, and also then I've used QR method or next word wall and situations, yes, problem solving situations, and mintimeta.com as to make word cloud. Then what about assessment? So I used self-assessment and peer assessment. So self-assessment I used how can I say it? So a student can thoroughly did all exercises in their in lessons, and then after it they could self-assess each how to say, not each other, themselves, yes. And then in peer assessment I gave task which called by method word cloud, and then can evaluate each other, yes. And here I used peer assessment according to assessment criteria, task achievements, then pronunciation and intonation, range, accuracy, fluency, and coherence. This task was for evaluate their speaking level, and I gave 0.5 for good, excellent, then 5 points for excellent mark, then 4 points for good mark, and then basic 3 or 2 points, and then poor 1 or 0.5 points. And then according to these criteria I write down all criteria according to their level. So am I right?
Yeah, you're perfectly right. This is a really rich assessment activity, and it is really interesting. You did a lot in a very small time, and just a couple to things that comes to my mind. And it is a really interesting work. I would suggest to incorporate also some assessment made by you. I mean, you prepare the rubrics and you have to judge the quality of their work in teacher perspective. An important aspect that I suggest to you is to consider sustainability of the assessment, because you planned something really interesting, which is really borderline between assessment and competence development activity. You know, you're developing the competence while assessing it, but you also have to consider that there are a lot of things to do and just keep in mind that you have to manage them at a certain point. But thank you for sharing your work. It is really interesting. I also think that time is running out already, and maybe we can go to my last slide, and so we can have some time for final questions regarding all the presentation, not only the handout exercise. So just to conclude, I have some what I consider to be the main takeaways of this presentation. And first of all, assessment should primarily aim to improve students' learning, and competence assessment does not start at the end of teaching and learning process, but it starts at the beginning when we decide what we want learners to be able to do, and when we decide our intended learning outcomes. And it shapes our teaching through the process. Competence assessment needs to be authentic. Competence assessment can and should combine multiple assessment methods. And I will say that in conclusion, we as teachers, we need to be reflective. And we need to maintain critical attitude towards our work. And here I like to quote Dylan Williams again, that said that as long as teachers continue to investigate that extraordinarily complex relationship between what did I do as a teacher and what did my students learn, good things are likely to happen. So next slide, please, Victoria. Here are just some of the readings that supported me in preparing this webinar, and I also suggest them to you, I think, and hope they could be useful if you could check them. And I'm done. I just want to say thank you very much for your attention. And now I think that it is time for your questions, not regarding the exercise, if you want to make questions about the exercise, of course, but about overall the overall presentation.
I thank you a lot for your presentation, Flavio. We are from Pedagogical College named after Mukhtar Umurkhanullah Awezov from Simei City, and we are using the scaffold methodology in our college, not only in our lessons and also in extracurricular events. And also our students, they're taking part in conferences and different events, and we are using scaffold in our lessons. So I'm really glad also to to see you with our colleague Асия Бурамбаевна. Yes. Thank you a lot. Спасибо, Виктория, большое вам за организацию данного вебинара.
It's great to hear this. Thank you very much. It is interesting that we also use scaffold for planning a lot of things, not only didactics.
В школе немножко чуть-чуть там другое, там навыки, умения для рубрику мы напишем с этим для родителей. что учащиеся, которые там наши в школе, ученик, что не владеет, что получается, что не получается, и что внимательно должна обратиться, какие там вопросы, какие там темы, дальнейшие цели. Вот рубрику мы так напишем. Это в школе. Ну, содержание, которое там, характер, черты вашим с рубриком одинаковые. Ну, там это понятно для колледжа, а в школах немножко там вопросы такие другие. Какие навыки владеет, какие там умения владеет. Вот таким вопросом мы напишем рубрику на родителей, который с этим, с учеником. Да, с этими это характеры, черты одинаковые, то там спасибо вашими, которые эту рубрику, которую вы показывали.
Thanks to you.
Да, спасибо большое, коллеги, за комментарии.
Минуточку.
Flavia, we've got a question here. How can we align assessment of knowledge and assessment of competence?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. There is also a big debate in, like I would say, in the political agenda of at least in Italy about knowledge and competencies. Competencies are better, knowledge is better. The point is that when you assess competencies, you are also assessing some knowledge, because there is no competence without knowledge. So if you have to explicit in your register the knowledge, you can plan an authentic assessment of a competence that you know that to the performance that has to be delivered, the competence performance that has to be delivered needs to include some knowledge. For example, if I ask to a student to choose I would say the best byproduct by calculating proportion, it means that they know how to calculate the proportion. And if the link between competence and knowledge is not always so linear, you can always ask them questions. I saw you did this. Why you did this? How does it work? Because sometimes somehow the product arrives, they deliver the product, the performance. I'm talking about the students, but maybe they cannot explain why, how, and that means that they manage somehow to deliver the product, but they don't know the foundations, the knowledge that is the fundament of competence. So consider that when you are assessing a competence, you are somehow always assessing also knowledge.
Да, уважаемые коллеги, спасибо большое.
У меня там, Виктория, один вопрос. Я
Да.
хотел узнать, вот, который Виталий, какие формы и виды используются формативное оценивание, это же важно, формативное оценивание, да. А какие формы или виды используются формативного
What are,
оценивания?
sorry, I didn't get the question. What are the formative assessment?
Да, какие виды и формы используются в формативном оценивании? Виды, формы.
There are three types. No, I don't have any tables to show right now. If you check on the reference list, the 2009 contributes by Black and William will explain this really, really well. In the last slide, the previous slide, if you can show the previous slide, Victoria, issue as once more. Okay, in the 2009 contribute of Black and William, there is all the development of the theory of formative assessment. If I well remember, there are also the differences between the three types of formative assessment, which are formative assessment, assessment as learning, and assessment for learning. And they listed the 5 strategies, the complete list of strategies that you can use for formative assessment.
Хорошо, спасибо. Ну, я смотрю, Блека Уильяма. Да, я знаю, некоторые у них там про оценивание материала я прочитал, но это посмотрю. Спасибо.
Да, уважаемые коллеги, спасибо большое за активную дискуссию. Отдельное спасибо Асель, Маденьет, Светлане за комментарии, за вопрос, за примеры. Также хотелось бы упомянуть, да, как мы с вами ранее договаривались, что если у вас есть примеры, да, которыми вы хотите поделиться относительно раздаточного материала, да, по рубрикам, которые вы сегодня, по которому вы сегодня работали, пожалуйста, отправьте его нам после вебинара. У нас, к сожалению, сейчас уже нет возможности предоставить, поделиться примерами прямо сейчас, но мы будем рады получить от вас обратную связь, да, после вебинара и постараемся также фидбэк вам предоставить. В завершении хотелось бы также поблагодарить еще и нашего эксперта Флавио Брешианини за его семинар, то есть за лекцию. Да. Спасибо большое всем вам, педагоги, уважаемые коллеги, за то, что выделили время, да, в своем плотном рабочем графике и уделили его Дарье Скаффолд и развитию своих профессиональных навыков. Хотелось бы напомнить в завершении вебинара то, что у нас осталось с вами буквально еще 3 вебинара в рамках серии международных вебинаров Дарья Скаффолд. Пожалуйста, подпишитесь на наш телеграм-канал, а также проверяйте периодически нашу страницу в Notion для того, чтобы оставаться в курсе анонсов, когда данные вебинары будут проходить, потому что именно эти платформы являются самыми главными, где мы размещаем всю подробную информацию. Также хотелось бы сказать, что сегодняшний вебинар, так же как презентация и раздаточные материалы, они будут доступны для скачивания, для просмотра после окончания данного вебинара. И да, буквально хотелось бы еще раз поблагодарить всех вас за участие и надеемся на встречу с вами уже в рамках других последующих вебинаров. Спасибо всем большое и доброго всем вечера.
Спасибо, до свидания.
До свидания.
Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure.